well, I can't tell people everything because they'll never buy my thing. And I think what you have to understand is if you give people absolutely everything, they see your competence and they're then willing to move forward with you.
Welcome to the Grant Wise Show. This podcast helps ordinary real estate agents build extraordinary companies. Let's grow in 3, 2. What's up, everybody? Grant Wise here. Welcome back to the Grant Wise Show. Excited for my guest today. I've got an old friend that I'm going to be interviewing to help you understand how to take your business to the next level. His name is Jeremy Ryan Slate. He is the founder and CEO of Command Your Brand. And I actually met Jeremy years and years and years ago. He was somebody that helped me early on get on a lot of different podcasts. And that was, I think, if I go back and look at it, something that really catapulted our sales when we combined it with other strategies that we were implementing to try to grow from a coaching standpoint. Getting on podcasts was one of the single most important things that I did. And so I asked Jeremy if he would stop by the show. He agreed. And this is one I think that you want to pay very, very close attention to. Jeremy is an expert in this space, travels all over the globe to speak on this topic. He's been featured in Inc. and Forbes. He is also recently featured in podcast magazines 40 Under 40. Jeremy, thanks so much for being on the show today, man.
Hey, man, thank you so much for having me. I'm rapidly running out of years to be on anybody's 40 out of 40, so I'm glad I made one before I run out of those last 2 years, man.
Yeah. Well, dude, tell us, I have obviously some context to the story, but tell everybody that's listening, how did you get into this thing? Because you built Command Your Brand into a pretty phenomenal company, but I know it wasn't always like that. So tell us the story.
So for me, I actually wanted to be a college professor. That was my real goal in life. I have my undergrad degree. I'm a double major in Catholic theology and Old Testament. And then I ended up getting my master's in early Roman Empire propaganda, which is not a very applicable skill in the world of getting a job. And the thing that happens is either you work at a museum or you get a job at a Catholic school. And I ended up teaching Catholic school to sophomores right out of grad school. And they had me for lunch, man, because I'm a couple years from 40 now, and you can imagine how young I looked at 22. They had me for lunch. I had coworkers trying to give me detention, and I just wasn't really enjoying my job all that much. And in 2013, my mom ended up having a really, really bad stroke, and she's still permanently disabled to this day. And it made me look at a lot of the things I was doing in my life. And I'm like, do I really want to do this forever? So I tried a number of different things. I tried insurance sales, which I was pretty good at, but I just hated talking about dying every single day. I sold products on Amazon. I did network marketing for a bit, which that gets a little weird because then you're trying to recruit all of your friends into something. And that got a little bit weird. And I had been a podcast listener since 2009. I had one of my college professors introduced me to them. So I started a podcast called the Create Your Own Life Show back in 2014. And in our first 30 days, we had 10,000 listens, and we started getting people asking us for help. So we started a podcast production company, and we were producing podcasts for people. We had one of the first ones we produced was a health show, which was a top 10 health show very quickly. And when we launched shows, we actually started putting people on podcasts to get other people to understand about it. And what we found is people liked going on podcasts way more than they actually liked having their own podcast. So we ended up actually teaming up with another podcaster, and we actually reached out to you as client number one, and you became the first client of our new business. First 9 months, we made multiple six figures. Things weren't really working out with that founder, and since 2017, we've been Command Your Brand, really trying to help clients get on the right podcasts.
Yeah, that's amazing. You were telling me, I didn't realize I was your first client way back in the day, which is great. You guys definitely knew what you're doing anyway, so it worked out. But what is Command Your Brand today? So you guys, are you a training company or are you still in agency work?
When I look at it, to exist in 2024, I think every company has to be a training company in some way. So books and education are a big part of what we do, but we are still an agency to this day. We have two parts to that. We actually produce podcasts for people as well, and also do the YouTube optimization with that. And then we've done what we always do, which is book people on great podcasts. And, along with that, we look at what shows should be going on, why should be going on them, what should you be talking about. And we really try to run people on a campaign over a year of creating the right attention, also creating the right narrative, because I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah. So how can podcasts help somebody grow a big business?
Well, I think first and foremost, people have the right expectations coming out of it, because everybody comes out of the gate and they all want to be Joe Rogan, or they all want to be on Joe Rogan. And I think you have to understand, number one, especially if you're somebody, starting out and newer, going too broad is going to absolutely kill you. And you have to figure out like, what is the niche I service, and even what is the niche within that niche. And I'll give an example of like, when we were working on your campaign way back, is you were working on real estate, but at the same time, I looked at it and I'm like, right, but what is this guy's vibe? And for you, your vibe was you positioned yourself as a real badass. So that was one of the things we were looking at within real estate, is how do you position yourself within a niche? And when you can do that, you can actually communicate to the right type of person. But I find too often people go really, really broad, and they're not going to communicate to the right type of person. So I would say first and foremost, figure out who your public is, who's that audience, because when you really get to know them, you start to learn, what do they think? What do they care about? What do they do? What are their fears? What are their likes? And when you can do that, you can actually speak to where they're at. So what you can see happen is you may not have, the same action as if you ran a Facebook ad where you're going to get all these people on your email list, but you're going to have people that are very qualified come into your audience and want to be a part of it. And you're going to find that education process to actually educate and become a client is going to be a lot shorter, because they've actually gotten a lot of education from you. And I think one of the number one things to that as well is tell people everything you know, because that is vital to helping them understand.
Is that why you think having a podcast is such a good idea, or being on podcasts is such a good idea? Because it gives you a chance to really like demonstrate your expertise to an audience?
Well, I think there's two flows to it. And I think, interestingly enough, I started having a show first, which is actually not what I recommend to people. I recommend going on shows first because you understand the hat of what it's like to be a guest, because it is very different if you've never been a guest before and you're trying to interview somebody. So I say, first and foremost, go on shows first as a guest and then start your own show, because you get to a certain point where you're like, okay, now I can do something with this. But what happens is you start to get seen by the right niche audience. You also get brand positioning. And if people aren't familiar with positioning, there's a really great book out there, Jack Trout and Al Reese. It's called Positioning: The Battle for Your Mind. And positioning is when you're seen for or against something. So the thing I absolutely hate, but it's the best example of it, is we're the Uber of blank, right? They took something that people are familiar with, which is Uber, and they've compared it to that. So you're grabbing somebody's position. You're grabbing that position in somebody's mind. So every time you interview a guest that's well known, we're like, oh, well, I've seen Jeremy with this person. I've seen Jeremy with that person, or so you start to grab credibility, right? And frankly, for us, one of the really big impacts we had is when I first had Grant Cardone on the show back in 2017. And a lot of his audience then jumped in, was interested in what I was doing, and they have so much trust for him. So what you're able to do is grab brand positioning and other people's trust. And that's a really, really important thing.
Mm-hmm. I think it's critical because like you have to build faith, trust, and loyalty in the marketplace before anybody wants to do business with you. And my experience was that I got to demonstrate my expertise to somebody else's audience. And then like my audience would grow in droves. Like our average cost to get an appointment when I was doing podcasting religiously, being a guest on somebody else's podcast, were like a third of what they were when I wasn't. It was fascinating.
One of the pieces of feedback we got about you from hosts was, that guy's really smart, right? So we actually hear that you ended up working with shows, like the host would actually end up hiring your agency to do stuff. And I think that's something to consider too, is number one, you have two audiences. One audience is the hosts, because you might be able to do some work with them. And number two is the people listening. But I think a lot of people come from the viewpoint of, well, I can't tell people everything because they'll never buy my thing. And I think what you have to understand is if you give people absolutely everything, they see your competence and they're then willing to move forward with you. Because if you don't have that level of competence, there's so many people online that are saying so many things. You need to show them that you're the person worthy of taking their money.
Mm-hmm. What does podcasting do? Because we talk about like being on other people's shows and how valuable that can be for you. But what does it do for you? Like if you have a show, how does it help you position yourself in the marketplace?
You're able to grab credibility about things you don't even know about. And I think that's what's really valuable. It's like, hey, I don't know about this topic, so let me go interview the world's top expert on it. So now I've gotten their credibility, but I also have their knowledge, because you're hopefully learning from them when you have that conversation. You're able to ask things of that person that other people can't ask. So I think that's one part of it. The other part about it is just from a content creation standpoint, is there's kind of two types of podcasts out there. There's a podcast where you're interviewing people, and then there's a content-driven podcast. When you're doing a content-driven podcast, people spend hours and days writing scripts for those podcasts. When you're interviewing people, I've spent maybe 25 minutes prepping for my interviews, if that. That's all the time that I then spend to create that content. And then that means that we take that video and we use a software called video.ai. And what we then do is it takes it and it splits it in all the individual chapters, which you can use as videos. It pulls all the shorts out of it, all the reels and things like that. So you're able to create one piece of content that you can use all over the place. And you should also I know we're having this conversation on Riverside. Riverside has a great transcription feature as well. So what we tend to do is take those transcripts and put them into a software, because regular ChatGPT is limited to, I think it's like 500 words or 2,000 characters or something like that. So we use a Google Docs extension called GPT for Work. And what it does is it allows you to do, I think for me, I'm putting like 40 minutes of a transcript in there. And I can say to it, okay, from this transcript, I want you to pull quotes. I want you to give me the format for a blog post. So it's kind of the ultimate like center vehicle to be able to create content from one episode.
Yeah. I think we create close to 24 pieces of content from one podcast. I'm talking about like the Grant Wise Show. Like this is a huge content vehicle for us, for me personally, because we can create so much content from what it is that we're doing here, which is so critical for especially a lot of people that tend to follow me, which are, real estate agents or team leaders. They're looking for ways to do more with less. And a podcast is, I think, a fantastic way to do that. For me, and I don't know if you've experienced the same thing, but I've always felt that having a podcast was one of the greatest relationship development tools that I could have ever come up with. Like when I was always putting myself in a position where I was reaching out to people asking for stuff like, hey, let me do this, let me do that, let me do this, let me do that. Crickets. But the moment that I started asking people if they wanted to be a guest on my podcast, like the conversation 100% changed. I don't think I've had maybe like 1% of the people I've asked have said no. And like, why is that? Why is this such a great relationship development tool?
Well, because you're offering value up front, right? Like if you're having somebody on a podcast, you're saying, hey, I've got this platform. I want to share this platform with you and I want to share attention with you. And I think that's where it really comes from. A lot of times when it's an ask without being able to give, well, it's kind of, you don't have enough in the bank yet to be able to do that. And I think when you've actually given somebody an interview, you put in a great position. So also like I've done a lot of speaking and stuff like that. I've never pitched for a speaking gig, man. Like I've spoken in Thailand, I've spoken in South America, North America, Europe, but like it's usually somebody heard me on a podcast or knows somebody that hosted me on a podcast, and that's how I've been able to get speaking as well. So it's kind of this really awesome hub to your strategy, but I think a lot of people get stuck on how many listeners, how many downloads, how many people opted into my list, and how many people bought something. And that's a part of it. It is. But at the same time, you have to realize this is the best networking vehicle that you have ever done. Like we had one of our clients, he's a doctor selling an aloe product. And he actually just interviewed him this morning for a segment we're doing called Icons. He made $60,000 in sales off of one podcast of a $25 aloe product because he got on, he said to the host, I want to make you some money. So he did a really cool affiliate deal with the host. So then the host wanted to pitch his product just as bad as he does. And the host had a big audience. So there's so much you can do with a podcast host, aside from even just the audience. And I think people just don't always consider that. They just consider, I'm here, people are going to hear me, people are going to take action, which hopefully they do if you're good. But at the same time, like there's so much value in the person you're setting across from.
100%. Okay, so if somebody's listening to this, like, all right, I think podcasting could help me grow my thing, my movement, my business, my mission, whatever that might look like. What are some things they should know? What are some things mistakes that maybe that they want to avoid?
Well, I'd say one thing is misestimating time. Like for us, we always had two packages. We had a year package and a 6-month package. And January 1st of this year, we got rid of the 6-month package because we found I ran the percentage. It was like 90.4% of our refunds, chargebacks, and problems came from that 6-month campaign. And what I've found is you need to commit to this for a year if you're going to see something, whether it's hosting a show or being on shows, because you're getting used to your own message, you're getting used to your way of delivering, you're building an audience, you're building trust. So I would say number one is the expectations. Be willing to be in this for a year and really build something. I would say the second thing is be very, very clear about who you serve. I think far too often people sit down and they're like, all right, I'm going to have the show where I sit down and talk to my friends and we talk about all these inside jokes that nobody knows and everybody's going to want to listen to it. People don't want to listen to that. What value are you offering to that specific audience people come to your show? And it is also as well, when you have any sort of a marketing message connected to your show, you have to think about how many holes in the bucket can I fill? Like any landing pages you're using, do you have retargeting set up? One of my other favorite tools that I absolutely love, it used to be called Get Emails. It's called retention.com. And you're able to put a retargeting pixel on your site that opts 30% of your anonymous traffic into your list. So you want to figure out like, what sort of holes do I have in my bucket of all my marketing messages that are going out in the show that I can do? Also as well, when you're giving out any links on your show, they should be like a vanity URL. So like, for example, when I'm going to give people the link that leads to my funnel, well, I have a 301 redirect set up, so it's really easy to get to it. So you want to make all of your marketing messages simple, concise, and fill all the holes of where somebody can get lost in your audience.
That's a lot of really great feedback. I didn't know that. What would you say it was retention dot what?
Retention.com, dude, it's the number one way we've grown our email list over the years. And we're on like their old model because I've been with them forever. So I pay like some dirt cheap price. But it used to be called Get Emails. And what they can do is this code snippet goes in your site and like they're able to opt about 30 to 50% of your anonymous traffic into your list. And it's like totally white hat. And we've gotten tons of sales that way because people opt in, they go through an indoctrination sequence and they come on and then they're on our list. So like you need to figure out where are all the holes where I'm not getting people and getting them, getting them into my list in some way.
What are some of the most valuable ways that you all build a bridge between opt-in and getting on the phone? Like how are you all doing this? Is it with really good emails? Like, is it with ads? How are you getting people that are opting in to get on the phone with you?
Going on podcasts. That's the number one thing that I do is we've changed the offer in the last couple of years, but like now we're doing, it's a free book plus shipping because it covers the cost of the ad and everything else we're running. But like, that's what we've been doing. And people come onto a list or they're on that list for 21 days. And there's a lot of indoctrination that goes through that. We have a course product that comes in there. And we're not even really talking about our high level service unless somebody gets to the kind of the end of that 21-day sequence and they bought a course or something. So I think what we're really concentrating on is the education side of things. And the better you educate people, the more prepared they are to make a buying decision with you. But I think what happens is a lot of people, they hear the idea of high ticket closer, whatever it may be, and they get a big product. They want to get somebody on the phone and they want to close them. But many times you don't have trust yet and you're going to lose so many sales. So for us, it's all education and it's all indoctrination sequences to get people to get trust to actually, hey, if they don't want to buy, maybe they know somebody that does. And I think that is the number one thing people miss is education.
I don't know if this is a metric you track or not, but how long do you see that it typically takes from somebody to become like an opt-in, an anonymous opt-in, whatever, to becoming a customer of yours?
I don't have an answer to that one. I apologize. That's not something I was thinking I had to have tracked for this.
I'm trying to get coached for free on my own podcast.
Oh man, I can look that up for you and I can tell you, I can probably look that up for you and tell you later. What I have found is we end up doing is every couple of months, we'll take a look at like our list that came in through retention. And we'll be like, I recognize that name. That's a client. Oh, I recognize that name. That's a client. So actually one of the things that we're working on right now is tightening up those sequences a little bit because typically somebody comes into the list either from a book or from retention. And then we're offering them a free masterclass and we kind of like overload somebody in value on that free masterclass. So then from there, they're either buying a course or if they're ready, they're buying a, regular, booking or producing service. So like for us, that's kind of like what the basic funnel looks like. But then we're also really big on, like how-to blogs every single week. So our list is also getting like a 1500 to 2000 word email every week of like something they can actually go out and do. So we're really heavy on content, man.
Now, I know what everybody's probably thinking, especially my audience listening to this is like, okay, that's great. But like, I live in a small town community. Like, I don't think a podcast could help me grow my business. Like, what would you say to somebody that was hyper local that was thinking about like having a podcast or a show of some sort?
There's two things to that. First, I want to tell them about the superpower that everybody in a small town forgets about. And I call this the small pond strategy because everybody's a big fish in a small pond somewhere. Little local newspapers that have kind of your local readership, a lot of them end up in Google News. So what happens is I tell people to make a list of the top 10 things in your area, make a spreadsheet. And if you can write a press release or get different things out, they'll usually print it in the print version of the newspaper. And they'll also run it in their online versions. Now you're getting backlinks to your site. And a lot of those are actually do follow links too. So that's a big deal. So if you're local, there is so much power there, but everybody skips it. Because they're like, oh, I want Forbes, I want Inc., I want Realtor.com, whatever it may be. They're skipping kind of that local area. So I would say that's one part of it. Another part of it too is when you're local, you can actually use a podcast to involve people locally because that's actually a huge benefit as well. So the house we're currently in, I ended up getting a great deal on this house because the selling realtor ended up listening to my podcast. So he had known who I was. And when I came into the house, he's like, hey, would you like to buy a house? Can I help you? Would you want to buy this house? So like that was actually like really good for us wanting to buy the house because it was locally I was known. And so there's a lot of things you can do to like create partnerships locally, like especially, like you can find your title guy that way. You can find like there's different people you can find locally with a great podcast. And I'll tell you what, man, people want to show other people what they've done. If you're trying to build a local real estate team, man, like interview the inspection guy, interview the title guy, interview the person that does septic, like interview all those people. And you're now building a network of people that want to promote you locally. So that's to me, it's a superpower. It's a different way to think about it than thinking about getting, thousands of listeners or tens of thousands of listeners. But there is a ton of value if you create something hyper local like that.
I don't know if everybody heard what I said a little while ago, but like one of the number one reasons that I have a podcast, and it's one of the top tools I use, is for relationship development. Because anybody I want to go build a relationship with, typically if I reach out and ask if they want to be on my show, I'm getting positive feedback, positive responses. And I think that if you're an agent in a hyper local community, or if you're in a local community, like that's the secret right there. Is this business is still largely done by referral, largely done by word of mouth. Like I think it's like still in the 80th percentile. Is most of the business is actually still done by word of mouth referral. And I think that if you can use something like a podcast or a local show and leverage the other relationships that exist in the marketplace, Jeremy said, title guy or insurance or septic or whatever, but think also local dog shop, local mayor, local restaurateur, like everybody in your local community that has something to gain from getting more attention wants to be a guest on your podcast, because they need more people to know about their thing too. And that is a gateway to developing a relationship with somebody that ultimately could refer you more real estate business. I've seen countless people do this and crush it. Very, very, very successful strategy. I think Kyle Whissel is probably one of the most notable that I've seen. He didn't do a podcast, he did a social show, but it was the exact same concept. He went out and interviewed a lot of restaurant owners, and through interviewing people about restaurants became the number one real estate team in San Diego County in less than 2 years.
And I'll tell you too, like with podcasts, like, this as much as I do, one of the hardest things is like you and I are virtual right now. Most podcasts are virtual, but if you're local, you're getting in front of people and you now have a reason to meet people, right? So like, whether you have an office or if you don't have an office, hey, maybe this is a reason to get a co-working space or something. Now have people come to you and do an interview. So it's like, it changes the game because people are now on your turf.
Yeah, that's so good. Okay. Jeremy, man, I appreciate you so much taking the time to spend with me today talking about podcasting and how people can use this. If somebody was listening to this and they were bought in, they're like, I think a podcast or, something like this could really help me. What would be some great next steps for them to take to learn more about putting a podcast together?
Well, I would say like we've definitely put together a lot of info on that. So, you can check out anything that we've done over at our site, which is commandyourbrand.com, or there's also a lot of great podcasts out there on podcasting, believe it or not. So like, I think that's also a great way to start. Adam Schäuble has a really great podcast called Casting of the Pod, which is really good if you want to learn more about how to podcast. There's also a really great podcast newsletter called podnews.net. They release a 3-minute podcast every single day and have been for years. So I think those are some of the best resources out there. I also put together a really great book if you're on the guesting side and you're looking to get some attention. It teaches you everything you know about putting together a campaign and getting seen. So that's over at bestpodcastbook.com.
Okay, awesome. I appreciate it, man. We'll make sure that we link up all the ways that people can connect with you and learn more about some of the things that you've got, your book and some of that other stuff in our show notes. And I can't thank you enough. I know you're a busy guy for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. And go Chiefs, right?
Yeah. For sure. Hopefully, if you're listening to this, it's post Super Bowl and the Chiefs won. I'm just going to put that out there.
Did you see the thing today? When people are recording this, there was a thing today that they say set the flight numbers for the Chiefs to the Super Bowl. The flight on the way there is going to be flight 87, and on the way back, it's going to be flight 1989 for Kelsey and also for Taylor Swift.
Oh, that's awesome! No, I didn't see that. That's fantastic, though. There we go. We got T Swift mentioned on the podcast. Hopefully, that'll help us. I appreciate it again. And thank you all for continuing to listen to the Grant Wise Show. It's much appreciated. This was a great podcast on podcasting. I hope you take it seriously, because I think, again, this is one of the most valuable relationship tools I've ever been able to use. I've had multiple podcasts and they've helped me build multiple 7-figure businesses. And so it's something that you should definitely take seriously. It could help you on a local level without question. I'll see you on the next episode. As always, I appreciate you. Peace. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Grant Wise Show. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, leave us a review, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks.